Good afternoon, everybody. Randy here from Grow Up. Just want to say thank you for joining us at our Grow Up Live webinar series. I'm here in beautiful Victoria, preparing for our show June 14th, 15th, and 16th of 2021. We hope to have you come out and join us. We're looking forward to hosting an in-person conference and expo and award show. Hopefully everybody stays safe, and we will see you in June. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's Av Singh. You may not have heard that, but that was the beautiful face and voice of Randy Rowe, and he is the face of the Grow Up Conference. And he was inviting you to come out to Victoria, British Columbia, June 14th, 15th, and 16th. That's going to be hopefully the one of the first times that that you can that we can all get together. So let's hope we can keep it safe and come out to Victoria. But the Grow Up is also going to be held in Niagara Falls in early September. So we hope to see you all sometime in person. I'm very excited about this Grow Up Live. It's really a real privilege to have Vantage Hemp Company here. We've got Deepank Utkhede, as well as Dr. Daniel Chinapen. But before we introduce them, I want to give thanks to people who are attending both this webinar, but also the people who are going to be sponsoring the Grow Up conference. And one of those sponsors is Marigold Marketing and Public Relations, and a very fortunate to have Bridget Hoffer to be the host for this and the panel moderator for this webinar. Very briefly about Bridget, and it is far too brief for her expertise. Bridget is probably the reason why the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation is so close to our hearts and minds. For almost 15 years, Bridget was the communications director, executive director at CBC. And then she co-founded the Marigold Marketing and Public Relations. And she's a brand strategist, communication strategist, something that this sector has really required. And so I'm sure she's been quite busy. So thanks to Marigold for supporting the Grow Up conference. And I will encourage you all to look at the chat, the box there here with the Zooms. You have an opportunity to ask questions through, or just even chat through the chat boxes. If you have any specific questions that you'd like both Deepank and Dan to answer, we'll be answering those towards the end of it. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Bridget.
Oh, thanks, Ab. Thanks for the warm introduction. And it's a huge privilege, and we're very proud to be partnering with you on this event. And I'm equally proud to be talking to our esteemed colleagues and clients and friends and colleagues from Vantage Hemp. Vantage Hemp is a large-scale, high volume extraction facility based in Greeley, Colorado. They've got a deep foundation and appreciation for, of course, CBD extraction, but state-of-the-art technology, which we are going to see today, and a meticulous focus on every detail from seed to extract. So they're GMP compliant. They deliver pharmaceutical grade extracts, including full spectrum oils, distillates, and isolates. And two of the leaders here today are Deepank Utkhede and, of course, Dr. Daniel Chinapen. Dr. Daniel Chinapen is the Chief Science Officer at Vantage Hemp. He has the oversight of operations, research, and development. Dr. Chinnapen has his PhD in biochemistry. He was a principal investigator at Harvard School of Medicine, Boston Children's Hospital, and his research focused into large molecular therapeutic delivery. He brings extensive experience from various cutting-edge biotech companies. He has peer-reviewed journals, and he has a very critical eye to the science of CBD, supporting Vantage Hemp's deep science approach. Fantastic leader for their team there. Deepank Utkhede is the Chief Operations Officer. He has 22 years of experience in pharmaceutical formulation, process development. He's worked extensively with pharmaceutical, developing pharmaceutical dosage forms, topicals, orals, capsules, parentals, drug and device combinations, and he is also very well versed in GMP and FDA regulation. So welcome to Deepank and Daniel. Thank you for joining us, and we've got a good crew. So the questions that we're going to focus on today are really about what to consider and how to build an extraction facility. And over the next few minutes, we're going to talk about space requirements, the kind of financial considerations that you should be thinking about, design and equipment, and safety. So first step, this question for you, Deepank. What should facility operators ask themselves before they begin building their facility?
I think the first question they should ask themselves is whether they're sane. Taking on building an extraction facility is a monumental undertaking. There's a lot of different aspects to consider, any of which, if you forget about or underestimate, could have a pretty dramatic impact on your end product. In terms of the big picture things that one should consider, the first thing is location. And it's not like buying high-end real estate. Really, you want something that's not in an urban setting. You don't want to be sitting in a residential area or a business park that's surrounded by residential, because you're going to have complaints. I mean, you've got to bear in mind, when you look at the extraction process for CBD, it's a dangerous process. You're dealing with, at a minimum, high pressures, or you're dealing with explosive solvents, explosive gases, flammables, and you're talking about not just a couple of liters. You're talking about tons of these solvents. So you want to be not in an urban setting. You want to be in the suburbs, preferably in an area where you don't have a lot of neighbors. It just makes things a lot easier. You also have to consider, once you kind of pick the location, you got to consider when you design your facility, what you're actually going to be doing in that facility. Are you going to just extract and produce a crude, or are you going to extract, produce a winterized decarboxylated full spectrum oil, or are you going to produce a distillate, or the crystal form, the CBD isolate? Once you've kind of understand the entire process that you're going to put into your facility, then you got to go and look at what equipment you're going to purchase and then ultimately install in your facility, because that will determine the space requirements. The one thing that I cannot emphasize enough is when you're designing your spaces, design it to what you think you're going to need and then double it, because you will always need more space and you will always use more space. The last thing you want to do is kind of cram your process into a space that's just the right size, because you'll always find that when it's just the right size, you'll always find something else that you need to put in there that you've forgotten about. So you want to have that room to expand and put in other things. And if there's not enough space, it's not only inconvenient, but it's actually a safety concern. If you don't have enough space to move around and move freely, you could end up cutting corners and result in compromising safety in order to do your process within the space.
Just to add to that, Deepank, so, I totally agree, having a lot of space is great, but obviously don't overdo it. You don't want to have a humongous building with multiple empty rooms and things like that, that basically biting more than off than you can chew. But absolutely, I mean, it seemed like we had too much space, but we definitely filled it out right away. So.
Yeah, good point. I mean, when you think you have too much, when you actually go and when you start putting things in, you'll notice that there's things hanging off of it. And so that will eat into your free space, you know, things like that. So just really be aware of space and leaving enough space to be able to put your process into it safely. The other thing, and you know, when I talked about location, it's not only the setting in which you're going to place your facility, but it's also the jurisdiction that you're going to use. You want to do your research and find a extraction, let's call it extraction friendly jurisdiction. If you go into anything that, like, you know, the major metropolitan areas, like, you know, the Denver area, aren't going to be your best options because there are there's a lot of hoops to jump through, and it won't be as easy as something that is more familiar with extraction technology, and is more open to that type of business coming into their community. In order to help facilitate that, one of the things we did at Vantage, and we did this early on as part of the design phase and the interaction with the Greeley city officials and fire marshals, is we hired a safety engineering firm. We hired actually Jensen Hughes, and that's all they do is safety engineering. Because one of the big pieces is when you go in and you're building one of these facilities is what codes do you need to follow and how do you follow them, or how do you achieve compliance with those codes? So the two big ones are the International Building Code and the other one is the International Fire Code. And they both kind of mesh together. One will start saying something, and then, you know, for more details, go to the other one. So hiring a firm like Jensen Hughes, they'll go through so you have to outline your process. They'll go through your process, and then they'll outline, okay, these are all the codes that we need to achieve. And then you can design the building to ensure that it meets all of those codes. What that also does is, because most jurisdictions have not been exposed to extraction and extraction technology for CBD. So what that means is, when you go and tell them you want to build a facility and you hand them drawings without this code analysis done by a safety engineering firm, you're basically saying, here, we've designed this, you go and you figure out if we've complied with all of the code. But what a code study does from a reputable firm, what that does is, when you hand these two together into whichever jurisdiction you're in, it provides them with the confidence that yes, you've built it and you've built it according to code. It facilitates their review of the plans and makes it a whole lot easier. We did that for the facilities we have here in Greeley, and we were able to get approvals within 4 weeks. We've heard of other jurisdictions where that process wasn't followed. It's 6 to 12 months, because you're now forcing people who are not familiar with extraction technology to go through and figure out what part of the codes are relevant and what part aren't. And it could lead them down a rabbit hole, because you're kind of leaving them to their own devices. They could go down a rabbit hole and end up with requirements that are so outside, you know, the realm of realism that you won't be able to build your facility.
So Deepank, the flip side to that is, maybe there's a lot of people out there that might not have the luxury or financial backing to build a facility from scratch, and they may be moving into an existing warehouse and that. So, you know, maybe make a comment on how things can be adapted or limits to that.
Yeah. So if you're moving into an existing facility, let's say it's not an extraction facility, you basically just bought a shell and you're going to put your facility into it, you still will need to do that building code analysis. You'll still need to hire the firm to help so that, you know, you're building it so it's compliant with the code, but it also gives that roadmap to the fire marshal and the city officials that yes, you are being compliant with all the codes. Whether you're building it from scratch like we did in here in Greeley, or you're retrofitting an existing building, you still need to do that code analysis to ensure that everything is compliant.
Wow. So you've got all those pieces together, you've got the location, determining your product, your process, safety, jurisdiction, codes,
Check your sanity.
yeah, exactly, sanity space. So how long does it take you to do all of that? Like, what's the time frame somebody should be thinking about?
So you should be looking, I mean, at a minimum, you should be looking at 2.5 years from the concept that you're going to build something to actually having it ready and you're actually producing material. Because you got to remember, I mean, for us in our Greeley facility, it took us about 1.5 years from when we said go. However, we already had permitted buildings here for the shelf. The 1.5 years took was for building, but also the design of the actual extraction facility that was going to fall within the walls. If you're looking at buying an existing building and then putting it in, you could look at probably about 1.5 years because you've already got the existing building. It's already been permitted, so you're basically just doing tenant improvements. At a minimum, you should be looking at 1.5 years to 2 years because you also got to remember, you're not only just designing the space, you got to buy all the equipment and you got to put the time in to find the right vendors, design the equipment because almost everything is custom. Design the equipment so that it meets your requirements, and then they have to build it. Building of equipment is anywhere from 6 to 10 months is what they'll tell you. And in actuality, it's probably closer to 10 to 12 months.
So yeah, basically the moral of the story is, however long you think it takes, add more time to it and
buffer.
Put that into your plans because even so you'll still have to work with the city to a certain degree, and you're working on their time, their schedules, and things happen as well. So kind of from our experience, even though we had so many things in place, it still took much longer than we expected, and just the nature of the business.
And when you look at the timeline to do it, you've got, I mean, as difficult as it is, you got to buffer for the unexpected. So when we came up with the concept to build these facilities back in February of last year, we didn't think we were going to be in the middle of construction when COVID hit. And that had a dramatic impact on our timeline, especially on the safety systems, the gas detection and fire alarm, because most of that stuff came out of China and Korea. At least the components came out of it, which were assembled in the US. So when COVID hit and China and Korea shut down, our lead times for these components suddenly went from a couple of weeks to 3 or 4 months. And even then it wasn't guaranteed because it was the assumption that they would be out of lockdown and be able to go back to work. Fortunately, it did actually turn out to be only 3 or 4 months and didn't extend longer, but it did still have an impact.
So beyond COVID, which has affected so many of us, what other things could you, for the people watching right now, what else weren't you prepared for, or what didn't you expect that happened?
I think one of the big things that we experienced was, and this is one of my points to talk a little bit later, is being unrealistic with how long it takes to build something. Even working with a reputable construction company, things just took much longer than we had put on paper. We had trouble getting trades in. We had some bad weather that ended up delaying our ability to pour slabs of concrete for our buildings and build the walls in place. We had issues with supply of raw materials to build. It was just, there was a lot of little things that when they snowballed together, instead of 1 or 2 things having a week here and there, they all kind of, because 1 week delay here delays something else by a week, but then you add another delay on top of that. So
And on
I
top
think
of that, there's also, we had to go back to the drawing board for a couple of things, and that required more permits and
yeah,
had to pass through multiple people's desks for approval. And it's just, yeah, it's just the nature of working with a lot of people in a really collaborative sort of environment. It just takes time, and yeah, setting a date is really tough, and you know, breaking it is even tougher. So that's kind of the moral of the story, I think, for us for the first several months.
But now you're underway and it's all happening, which is
Yep.
amazing. You know, you've got the buildings up and going. And so in terms of the financial considerations of getting to and from, Dan, how can operators protect themselves against change orders, cost overruns? Any advice there?
Well, yeah. So yeah, things do change and things happen. I think what helps is setting standards and quality for your process that could avoid any potential, you know, recalls or you know, setting a good expectation on your process, and having a good quality assurance team, I think, is key. And just enforcing certain procedures. You know, there's also efficiency issues you have to take into consideration. Like Deeps will show you in the facility. It was designed so that with efficiency and safety in mind, but especially efficiency, and just in terms of the process, a lot of time can be wasted shuttling things from even just across the room versus having things right next door. And having a good plan, I think, is definitely key. And going back to standards, I think that's an important consideration, and holding to certain standards, because you know, in this industry, you know, there's definitely a lack of a good definition of what certain products are, and we're pushing to have more standardized the quality, but those sorts of things can result in a lot of delays in the production. As in, you know, you could be producing a product that has a lot of THC, and you may see that coming, or you may not. And do you have something in place to remediate it, or there's a contaminant throughout the process? And so, you know, on our end, we try to control everything coming into the facility. We have a good analysis of, you know, whole panel, and generate a certificate of analysis, so we know what's going in is high quality, and then we can monitor it along the way. But you know, if you try and cut corners, that usually never works out in the end. It's kind of like this garbage in, garbage out sort of philosophy. You save a lot of time, you know, looking through and looking through the data and quarantine certain products before going to the next step. And that's kind of what we have in mind with this facility. Just basically like a pharmaceutical company sort of approach, which is several of our backgrounds. Basically, we're treating it more as a drug than we are, you know, just something. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's kind of the way it's the only way we really looked at things, and I think that helps.
And also, I mean, when we look at how you prevent cost overruns during the actual the construction of the facility and the design of the facility, I think most of our cost overruns were due to equipment and the equipment vendors. You have to really do a detailed analysis of the equipment and figure out not only what the equipment does, but more importantly, what the equipment needs as a whole. So something like, you know, we have a continuous flow decarboxylation system. Well, yeah, that's a great system, but when we bought the system, they're like, okay, these are all the components. Here it is. And then partway through the manufacturing, we started talking about, well, how does this all go together? It's like a 3-story structure. How does all this go together? And it was at that time they say, well, you're going to have someone on site build you a structure for this to sit on. And I was just like, wait a minute, well, why didn't you tell me this earlier on? Because basically it was probably 3 months before delivery. And we would, and if I hadn't asked the question, how this is all going to sit, we would have ended up with a delivery of basically just a whole bunch of parts with nothing for it to sit on. Then we also got into, okay, what utilities do you need? Oh, we need nitrogen fed at 23 cubic feet per minute. For those of you who don't know, that's a pretty large flow rate for nitrogen. So then we had to think, oh, now we have to install a nitrogen system. Well, what's the best nitrogen system? Do we want a liquid nitrogen dewar sitting outside that we have to refill? Or do we spend the extra money and have a continuous generation system, which basically pulls nitrogen out of the air and then feeds our system? It's more, so we went with the continuous generation system because it would pay for itself in a year. We had to do the financial analysis. Do we spend more money now and save money later, or do we save money now and spend more money later? So, you know, you have to go through that. And the other thing you have to be really careful on is your electrical requirements. All of the materials, all of the equipment is all electricity dependent and heavy dependent. Our extraction building, so we have 2 buildings here. Our extraction building originally had a 600 amp service to it. We had to upgrade that to 2,000 amps, and we're kind of bumping up against that. So we may have to get another, and that's the largest transformer they make. So if we want more power, we have to install another transformer.
So yeah, a lot of it goes back to working with or vetting your vendors in a way that they're that they're thorough and the expectations on both sides match, because installation for them may mean installation something different to us. So and yeah, that was definitely a learning process.
So an important balance between being a good client and being a good service provider and understanding each other's needs, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But
good.
Be prepared. You will be disappointed by your equipment vendors.
That's true.
You will be disappointed. You basically, I mean, the industry's new. So a lot of the equipment hasn't been vetted. I mean, we're talking 2 years into legalization, coming up on 2 years into legalization. So there's all the equipment's new. A lot of it is the first off, like we've got first off hydrocarbon systems, and we're still kind of working through all the bugs. We picked them because they were the largest ones. We need to be we are a high volume producer, so we need the largest of everything. So when you start pushing up against design limitations and first off the runs of equipment, we're going to be working through a lot of issues, and that's what we're doing.
So we do have, okay, and just one question for the folks on the line: how much does the typical extractor cost?
Extractor or extraction facility?
Extraction facility.
Well, that's a good question. That's but it's like
depends
asking
on your
how long.
scale,
How about a range?
It's like asking how long is a piece of string.
Okay.
The cost of the facility will depend on your overall what your scale you're working at. Are you going to be are you going to produce a couple of kilos a day, or are you looking at producing 100,000 kilos a year? So our facility here, if you take into account, we own the buildings and we own the land, is roughly about $30 million.
Mm-hmm. Which is a huge investment and an incredible, boost to the community and the economy and providing jobs, etc. So that's, that's just a range from you being a large scale to small scale. So thanks for your openness on that. Let's move to talking about some design and equipment considerations. We are getting some questions, so I'm going to try and get through a couple of things here.
Okay.
One of the things that you talked about is considerations to prevent contamination and workflow and process efficiency. how will, so we've covered that a little bit, but how will your chosen, how would a person's choosing their extraction method impact on their considerations? And maybe you can give us a little overview of the facility, Deepank.
Sure. Okay, so there's a number of parameters that go into protecting the product from contamination. It's not just the selection of your extraction method, but really it comes down to your facility itself. So let me just turn this camera around. We can show you some of the things that we've implemented here at Vantage. So you can see we're out in a warehouse space, and this is where all of your biomass will initially come into and be stored, and equipment and all materials before it goes into the facility. Now, there's going to be two ways for people and material to go into the facility. People will enter through this door over here. So outside here, they'll change into scrubs, and then they'll go into this room here, where they'll don a lab coat. They'll put on booties, hairnet, beard cover if necessary. They'll wash their hands, put on a pair of gloves, and then be able to go into the facility through this door. So there's a break between the outside and inside of the facility, so that it's not just, when you open the door to the facility, it's not just outside. So that's for people. So that's specific for people. Materials and equipment will come in through this airlock system. So an operator from the outside will open the outside doors. They will bring materials into the airlock. They will then exit the airlock through the doors they came in. And then someone who's already gowned up will come inside, open the second set of doors. They'll wipe down the equipment or materials, and then be able to bring it into the facility. And in terms, so that's how we, keep like the clean space on the inside of the facility. So this is our central corridor. So we further separated the manufacturing spaces into separate rooms, so that there's no cross contamination, and materials are kept within the room that are required for that room. So we have the central corridor, and then all of our rooms kind of branch off each side. So we'll go into our hydrocarbon extraction room, which is this first one here. We have two of these rooms, and you can see like it's a clean room. It's cleanable. So we have all the floors sloping to drains. So we do a regular cleaning of the rooms with a bactericidal and a cleaning agent, so that the rooms stay clean. When biomass is brought into the room, it's not brought in loose. The biomass is already packaged in extraction socks, so all the dust is contained within it. So when we put the socks in the extraction tubes or take them out of the extraction tubes, we don't have a lot of dust in this room. The other methods of doing it is you actually load the extraction tubes in the room, and you end up with a very messy room. So we maintain cleanliness by ensuring that we don't have any loose biomass in these rooms. And collection, you can see on our outlets, we have tri-clamp connections, so we can directly connect vessels to the outlet to collect our product, so it's not exposed to the environment. Other aspects that you have to take into consideration when you look at designing a room. So when we talk about having enough space, what we're going into here is our winterization room. So this room is dedicated to the winterization of our crude extract. So this is where these are the tanks that we dissolve our crude extract into an alcohol, and then we go through a filtration process. Did here, and then we have a surge tank that will hold that filtered alcohol solution before it goes into our falling film evaporator to remove that alcohol from the oil, and then collect our full spectrum oil from here. But you'll see that there's no open systems here. Everything is a closed system. So we have these tanks here where we're going to be doing our dissolution of our crude into the alcohol. Well, the alcohol is pumped into the tank, or then we mix that alcohol while we introduce our crude into it. The tanks are sealed. We will then it is vented, and there's a 0.2 micron vent on it, so that there's no when we're filling a tank or draining the tank, the air that's going in or out is filtered. So the system is sealed, and then when we go to the filtration process, the hoses, you can see that the hose is connected directly to our filtration skid, and we don't have an open filtration skid. This is a completely sealed, high pressure filtration system that allows us to do the filtration completely enclosed. Once it goes to the filtration, then you can see that it's still within that system. It goes into this tank here. The tank will house our filtered solution. And again, it has a vent filter on it. So as it's filling, it pushes it, emptying as it feeds the falling film. It draws filtered air in, so your process. It then feeds into our falling film evaporator, which again is a completely closed system under vacuum. And then we collect our full spectrum oil from this pot still in the middle here into a bucket, which we close to ensure that prevent contamination. This room is specifically designed to hold high volumes of alcohol. This is not a T1D1 room. It's actually a hazardous classification room of an H2. And one of the requirements for that is when you go into the hazardous classifications, you no longer are bound by volume restrictions on flammable liquids. That's why we went to that. But in order to be called a hazardous room, and in order to have the ability to have large volumes of alcohol, 25% of this room must be on an outside wall. However, if you're going directly against an outside wall, all your outside walls are always going to have, you're going to have emergency exits out of everything, out of all your rooms. So what that means is if you just have your room up against an outside wall, then you're directly from the inside to the outside, you have no break, you have no airlock. So what we've done is we've designed in a airlock system. So this is the outside wall, and we put in this demising wall, and we've basically created an airlock so that this is the break between the dirty outside. So if these doors are open, you're not directly into our manufacturing space. So that's another way that we're protecting our product from contamination. The other aspect is after each of our extraction steps or purification steps, the product goes into inventory and is kept there under quarantine until it's release tested. So there's no fear that, if we have material that may be bad, it goes on to the next step without it being tested fully. So you don't contaminate downstream processing or downstream equipment because everything is released before it's allowed to move on to the next step.
You guys are masters at putting through this contamination prevention and workflow and process efficiency. Congratulations. It looks amazing.
Thanks.
It looks amazing. So how does this all work? So when you're thinking about your chosen extraction method, how does that impact on some of those considerations?
That's a good question. It really, it really doesn't. You would put all these in place regardless of your extraction method. Where you have to take into account is just the space requirements for each of those what your chosen extraction method is and the scale that you're going to work at. If you're looking at CO2, you can go from a CO2 machine that could do 1 liter at a time to a CO2 machine that could do 30,000 kilos at a time. You just have to account for that in your space planning.
Yeah, to add to that, so I mean, there's been, there's a little bit of controversy out in the field of, hydrocarbon versus CO2. And we have both of them, but and a lot of people say hydrocarbon is more gentle and it retains the terpene profile and it's more like exactly what you're getting from the plant. But really both processes, it depends on the operator and how you're tweaking the knobs. And although hydrocarbon, you can get a nice product, a lot of times the crude, you can get a lot of the chlorophylls out as well, which you don't necessarily need. And you can end up with some trace solvent behind, whereas CO2, not so much. And again, for CO2, it depends on how you finesse it. And you can produce a very crude, I guess, crude oil with hydrocarbon. But if you're gentle with it, you can produce a nice kind of like a peanut buttery, very aromatic sort of product too. So it does depend on what you want in the end and the type of product. But as Deeps mentioned, the CO2 is definitely lower throughput depending on your system compared to hydrocarbon.
We're getting, thanks for that answer, Dan. We're getting a lot of questions queued up here. I just wanted to touch on two more things before we go to the questions. Any other advice on what needs to happen before you have your inspections, and how do you prepare? And then the second one is, should you publicize your inspection certifications, your standards and approvals?
Just touching quickly on how do you prepare for inspections. If you're doing it right, you don't need to prepare for inspections. You should everything should be ready. And everything, if you're scrambling the last minute and trying to hide stuff or document things, then you're not doing it right. And having basically a checklist all along the way of things that should be in place and are in place and following up, I think is the best way to handle inspections. And in an ideal world, obviously. Go ahead.
Just to build on that. So, the inspections, there's going to be a number of different types of inspections. You've got inspections from regulatory authorities, and you got inspections from like the fire marshal and city officials. The regulatory ones, just exactly as Dan said. I mean, to prepare for an inspection really should be nothing. You should be just, you're ready for it. For like the fire marshal and stuff, same thing. You should be following the rules. If you have to hide stuff, that means you're not working in a safe, and you're not working to the safety criteria that you set for yourself and that you told the regulatory bodies that you would achieve. Mm-hmm. So if you're running around scrambling trying to hide stuff, you're doing something wrong. That's not what the rules are there for. That's not what the inspections are there for. The inspection should be just to confirm that you are doing what you said you were going to do and what we agreed to. Because when you get the approval from the city or from any regulatory body, it's an agreement that yes, you're meeting the requirements and we expect you to continue to meet the requirements. It's not you're meeting the requirements right now. As soon as we're gone, do whatever you want. That's not so you want to continue to meet those requirements all the way through the process.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And that just
excellent advice.
That just benefits the company because it's not there to make people annoyed and to pass the test. It's there for a lot of times it's for safety and quality of the people and the product. So it shouldn't be looked at as an annoying chore. It should be looked at as trying to understand why it's in place. So.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you. So we're gonna. I love that. I love those answers in terms of the inspections and having everything in place. So true. So the first question we have is from Gary Harnum, and he's asking if you can speak to the percentage recovery and cost per gram or ml comparison of methods. If there's a more cost-efficient method, I guess he's asking. And can you speak a little bit more about your decarboxylation system?
Sure. The difference between the two systems, I think our overall costs are going to be approximately the same. And the reason why I say that is because our overall yield is approximately the same. You're anywhere from, in terms of input mass and resulting crude, is anywhere from 10 to 14%. And this seems to be universal between the two systems. So I think our costs will be the same. Where it may differ slightly is the terpene profile or the overall profile of the full spectrum oil and distillate produced from each one of those. And those are going to be specific to customers. The customers will be looking for different flavor profiles or appearances. And so we'll tailor that to what the customer wants. In terms of our, sorry, Dan, did you want to add anything to that?
No, good. We're doing good.
Yep. And in terms of decarboxylation, so what we have is we have a continuous flow decarboxylation system that basically it's basically hooked up to a hopper. It auto feeds a conveyor belt that feeds it has basically a 15-foot long tube that's heated to 365 degrees, and that tube has a central spindle with a bunch of paddles in it that not only mix but push that biomass through the tube, and it keeps that in that tube for about an hour. And in that tube, we can achieve through about 95% decarboxylation or greater from the CBDA to CBD. Then after it finishes in that, it gets it flows into a second tube that's also 15 feet long. That cools the biomass down to room temperature before it's ejected from the system. The system we currently have can do anywhere from 300 to 400 pounds an hour of continuous flow, and it can run 24/7. So yeah, that's our decarboxylation system.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's a nice advantage of being able just to continuously feed the machine. I mean, compared to, you know, like most systems, in most places they may have an oven and take it out, which is more batch method. This is nice in a way, you know, it's very finessed. It's not a simple system. It's more like a Rolex watch of decarb, but it comes with all its associated repairs and stuff like that. But
don't forget cost.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And quality.
Yeah.
And quality. And quality. Yeah. So the next question. Oh, sorry. Did you want to say something? Sorry, Dee.
Oh, just our decarboxylation system. I mentioned it earlier. It's under a nitrogen environment, which is difficult to achieve in a conventional oven. So what we're able to do is also prevent the oxidation of our cannabinoids during that process.
Okay. So I'm going to move to the next question, which is, if you wanted to run an R&D extraction, so research and development, what technology would be best? Supercritical CO2? That's the question.
It goes back to what you're trying to achieve and what your extract characteristics are going to be. I mean, there's a number of different. There's hydrocarbon, like the liquid propane. There's also butane. There's CO2. There's also ethanol, cold ethanol extraction. Yeah. There's a number of different extraction techniques. It all depends on what your end product you want your end product to be. Will dictate what extraction process you're going to use. It's kind of hard
also
to
what
say
you can
this is
afford
the best
too.
process.
Also, what you can afford too, because anybody can do an ethanol extraction versus the other ones. You need high pressure and a lot of control, and there's a lot of dangerous stuff happening. So you need a good facilities, a lot of safety. So yeah, it really depends on what your budget can afford and exactly what the end product you're looking for.
Okay, well, that's good. I hope Lyndon Ashton is happy with that answer. So this is a question from Niaz Alakan. Their question is, what do you think of solventless extraction, specifically ice water hash extraction, which is an efficient way to harvest the trichomes, which is where the THC, CBD, and terpenes and other cannabinoids are contained?
Yeah, we've heard of that technology. We don't know enough about it. At least I don't know enough about it to speak to it intelligently. Dan, have you done any research on it?
No. I mean, it's basically a freeze fracture type of method. I think I could be completely wrong, but yeah, I think I should refrain from commenting anymore.
Okay, well then, but we'll move to the next question, which is, do you use FRP coverings for the walls?
Yes.
Yes.
All of our rooms are floor to ceiling FRP.
Okay, that question was from Frank Brams, and then
And
Gary.
and just
oh,
so
sorry.
everyone, just in case anyone else, just in case no one, someone doesn't know what that stands for, it's fiber reinforced panels. And these are paneling that's used in food production facilities. So they're washed down, they're sealed. It just, it allows us to do a really good deep clean on the rooms.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. That was questions from Frank Brahms. Gary Harner has another question, which is, have you imported any product to Canada?
No.
No,
We are
not
in the
at this
process.
point.
We're in the process of getting permits with various LPs in Canada. But it's a process that has to be initiated by a Canadian LP. They need to get the permit, and then we can import against that permit.
Okay. This is a question that we had talked about before, and so we're just waiting to see if there's any more questions from the group. But one of the questions that folks have been thinking about is, should you publicize your safety certifications and facility approvals? We've talked a lot about safety, and why? If so, why?
I think you should. It's not something. Advertising, not really. I think letting people know that you've achieved these milestones is important, because it means that your facility was designed not just for an extraction facility, but it was designed to be safe. So that kind of goes to security of supply. If you've got if you're a clandestine facility, it's only a matter of time before, because you don't have the proper systems in place, it's only a matter of time before something goes wrong, and that will affect, your ability, that facility's ability to supply customers. For us, I think, because we've got all the safeguards in place, and the safeguards are not really to as a final, we'll contain it. No, the safety systems we have in place are set up at two levels. One is a level which, it warns you that something is not working right. You should probably shut things down, figure out what's wrong before it gets into an alarm state. So it gives you feedback immediately that, you've got to fix something before it gets into a dangerous situation. And also when it gets to alarm state, the alarm states are set based on, like, for example, in our liquid propane extraction rooms, we have sensors in there. We have 8 sensors in each one of those rooms that detect propane. And there's an alert level to say, okay, something's wrong. But then there's also an alarm level where the fire department's called. But that's just saying that there's a dangerous concentration of propane in the room. But the room itself is designed so that, there's no spark generating material in there to ignite that material, to ignite the propane. And it goes right down to our tools that are in the room. Our tools are spark proof. Our tools are beryllium, so that they don't create sparks when you're, loosening bolts and stuff, So it's not just, okay, we have a detection system to say that the propane levels are high, but we have all the other safety systems in place to ensure that. And that's part of the code study that I talked about earlier. They talk about, okay, this room needs to be fully classified. So all the electrical has to be classified. All the materials that go into it have to be classified, including your hand tools. There's no, you can't bring in a rigid drill into that room. You can't. Everything is done by hand, because the rigid drill, I mean, there's a motor in it that creates a spark. That can't go in the room. Even if you're not running, it can't go in the room. You can't bring cell phones into the room, things like that. So there's a lot of layers, and that shows that, you've taken every precaution and that you're operating safe.
Yeah,
and publicizing definitely will help people understand what goes into it and what you're doing, and And for aspiring extractors,
Yep.
it lets them know what needs to be in place before you get sticker shock.
And for people buying the products too, consumers
Exactly.
at the end of the process want to know
It's probably the most
what
important. Yeah.
exactly. So another comment from Niaz Alikan. How does ice water extraction compare in cost / gram to CO2, ethanol, and other hydrocarbon extraction systems? Is it safer and cheaper, but would that be a good strategy for LPs looking to add extraction to their facilities? Thank you in advance for your answer.
Again, I'll defer. I don't know enough about that extraction technology to comment, so
okay.
I'll let Dan.
Yeah, I think it's more. Yeah, you get more of the natural plant out of it, but I think you're left with a lot more to clean up. But it depends on what your end product is. And yeah, we're definitely all solvent in CO2 here, so that's our lane.
Absolutely.
That's your lane. So we're staying in the lane. So two final questions. What is the cost per gram for extraction? That's from Gary Harnham again.
So our costs, not taking biomass into account, because that is all over the place right now, is on our front end on our CO2 extraction or hydrocarbon will be about $25 a kilo.
Okay, great. And then there are a couple more questions coming in, but we are actually wrapping up. So there's just one. What's the best method to remove chlorophyll from the extract? Is there a way to customize the extraction to avoid chlorophyll in crude extracts?
Yes. I mean,
yes.
you design your so the best way to remove chlorophylls is not to extract them to begin with. So design your first step extraction. So whether it's CO2 or a hydrocarbon, design your first step to be to avoid the extraction of that. And that's one of the things that we spent a lot of time with CO2 in developing that extraction process. When we first got it, we ended up with this black tarry material that smelled acrid and had kind of a burnt smell to it. And it was because we were running the vendor recipe that they had given us was running too hot. It was running at too high a pressure, and it was just extracting everything, but also burning it at the same time.
Yeah.
When we started doing process development, and we have our own lab on site, and that helped tremendously in order to develop that process very quickly, we were able to get to, as Dan mentioned earlier, to this nice peanut buttery kind of crude extract that has a sweet kind of hemp smell to it. So by backing off on the pressure and the time and the temperature, we were able to get to there, and avoids or minimizes the extraction of those undesirable things like chlorophyll.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. So we are at the end of our conversation. Thanks for all the almost 40 people that stayed with us during the past hour. And thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Deepank, for the amazing tour. And thanks to Vantage Hemp. And if anyone wants to reach out to Vantage Hemp, it's www.vantagehemp.com. And please reach out to Harv Johal, the director of Vantage Hemp. Thank you so much, you guys.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Pleasure.
Right.
And with that, I just want to give thanks to Marigold Marketing and Public Relations. I want to echo Bridget's comments regarding Dan and Deep's comments and their willingness to show their facility. In respect to cold water extraction, that's a good lead into 3 weeks' time. We're going to have Master Hashishin Frenchy Cannoli join us to do a long Q&A session. So please join us in 3 weeks on December 10th. Thanks so much, and see you in Victoria and Niagara.
Thank you. Thanks,
Great.
Ab. Thanks
you.
for the partnership.
Bye, everyone.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye.